Getting started with Power BI enterprise projects. This is your best practice checklist. Welcome to another episode of Power BI for the Enterprise, focusing on best practice guidelines for enterprise design. By enterprise design, I mean if your Power BI solution will be used by multiple users in your organization and it should be scalable and future-proof, that's an enterprise solution, and you should be following these guidelines in all of your Power BI projects. Now, this is a short checklist. It's part one, and I'm going to expand on a number of these topics in subsequent sessions and blog posts. So consider this a best practice checklist to get you started. All right. Number one, use a backed up file location to store your Power BI files. So when you create a Power BI desktop file, that should be stored locally on your computer, and it should be synced or backed up to the cloud or some kind of redundant storage. It could be OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, Teams file, folder, etc. But make sure that at the end of the day that your files are backed up. So best practice is, what could go wrong? Imagine that tomorrow when you turn your computer on that it's not going to work, your hard drive is broken, and you need to be able to recover those files. Number two, ensure that your local PBIX file size doesn't exceed 100 to 200 megabytes in size. But wait, I'm importing a lot of data. How can I keep that file size so small? My rule of thumb is to never exceed 100 megabytes in size. I'll explain how to do that here in just a few minutes. Number three, ensure that all data sources are accessible from a shared location. If you're importing a group of files, or Excel files, CSV files, make sure that those files are on a shared network drive or cloud storage. So imagine that if another developer were to open a copy of your PBIX file and do a data refresh, would those files be at the same file path? Don't put them on your local computer. So make sure that they're shared and it's a shared folder or shared file path. Number four, plan to separate your data model from your reports. That doesn't mean that you have to do it right now, but if this is an enterprise solution, that means that you're going to publish a data set. You might endorse or certify that data set, and then more reports will be created based on that connected data set. And to do that, those report files will be in a separate PBIX file. So plan to separate your reports from your data set sometime in the future, if not now. All right. Number five, close and save your PBX file at the end of every day. If you're using a source code repository in a formal project, then you want to actually check that in and sync. If you're using OneDrive or OneDrive for Business, then simply close the file and then let SharePoint OneDrive version that file and check it in and sync it. But make sure you do that at the end of the day. Don't leave it open all night. Number six, ensure that all queries are foldable for data sources that support query folding. And if you don't understand query folding, do some research, and I'll have a post on that later as well. But query folding is a very important concept in Power Query and Power BI. It essentially lets the query be processed at the data source, which is far more efficient than importing all of the data and then filtering only the data that we need. Number seven, ensure that parameters are used for all data source locations, things like database instances, the database name itself. Use parameters to manage all of that information. So if you need to move your files that you're importing to another folder, you just change the parameter. If the database instance name changes or if the name of the database changes, you just change the parameter. We don't have to go in and change the queries. This also helps us with deployments, such as migrating from dev to QA to production. So always use parameters to manage that information. Speaking of parameters, use date range parameters to limit the records in your largest files. So in a true dimensional model, all of our numeric data are in fact tables, and fact tables typically are going to have a date that we can partition or filter on. So if you create a range start and a range end parameter, and then create a date range filter within that table, you can control how many records are imported, which keeps the development working set down, minimizes the size of the PBIX file. Then you don't have to wait so long for data to be refreshed as you're doing your unit testing. It also will allow you to enable incremental refresh and partition those tables when you start working with large volumes of data. Even if you don't plan to implement incremental refresh, this is a good pattern to follow. So follow the rules to set up incremental refresh, whether or not you plan to use it. Number 9, remove all unneeded columns. Any column that you don't absolutely need right now, get rid of it. You can easily go back and add more fields and columns later on. Err on the side of keeping your tables very lean. Get rid of the columns that you don't need for now. Number 10, rename all cryptic table and column names using friendly names. When you're creating a data model with Power BI, you're enabling a user experience, and your users are going to find a model with friendly names to be much more inviting than column names, field names, and table names that perpetuate Pascal case and camel case and, cryptically named things that some database developer or some application developer had defined within their code. Those things should not be exposed. And I can't reinforce how important this is and how much of an impact it can make to make sure that every object name exposed to your users is friendly, inviting, and intuitive. Number 11, hide all key fields and any fields that are used just for utility purposes. So in order to relate two tables together, we typically have a primary key and a foreign key if those tables are imported from a database. And those key fields are usually not human readable. They exist only for the sake of facilitating a relationship. Hide them, make them go away. You still need them in the model in order to create the relationship, but users don't need to see them. So hide those. And if you have columns that exist, maybe only for the purpose of sorting another column or some other utility purpose, hide those as well. Another thing that I typically do is I will hide all of the numeric columns in my fact tables, those that are used as the basis for my measures. Hide all of those and then create explicit measures. That's it for now. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining Power BI for the Enterprise.